Hello there and welcome to the Method Matter Show, Beers on the Balcony. I'm your host, Greg Cuilloin, the co-founder and director for Method. This show is purely centered around interviewing true thought leaders in Australia and learning more about their journeys, gaining some insights into their past, present and future. And today I'm very fortunate to be sharing a beer with Khalid Ahmed, the CFO of MView here in Melbourne. Khalid, how are you?
I'm great, thanks, Greg. Thank you for having me on. It's a nice way to start the week.
Indeed, mate.
Get to socialize with someone that's not part of the business. So it's a rarity these days.
It is, mate. It is. And listen, we're super thankful for you making the time, mate. We know how busy and maniacal it can be in your world. So thank you so much, mate, for taking the time to chat.
No, absolutely. It's my pleasure to be on.
Brilliant. Well, mate, before we launch into it, mates, Beers in the Balcony, all right, the Method series. Tell me, mate, what are you sipping on?
So I am actually being a little bit boring today, but it's a beer called Heaps Normal. And one of my friends got me onto it recently, but it's actually got no alcohol in it, but it tastes exactly like an XPA. So I was skeptical the first time I had it, but after 1 week of annual leave, I figured it's probably time for my body to have a little bit of a break from a beer. But
it's very sensible. Very sensible of you, mate. I'm impressed.
Mate, no, it's actually quite delicious. You should check it out sometime.
I will, mate. I will. I'm a bit of a traditionalist as well myself. I absolutely love my goat. Big fan of this. It's a very enjoyable beer, indeed, as it is branded, mate. So cheers to you, pal, and thank you so much for coming on, mate. Now, for those of you that don't know who Khalid is, as mentioned, Khalid is the CFO of MView Live Video, Melbourne-based, high-growth tech company that specialises in providing mobile video, live streaming, and evidence management solutions to law enforcement, public safety groups. A couple of organisations that you can boast: New South Wales Police with the body-worn cameras, and Fire and Rescue New South Wales with the fire track ladder cams, and drone streaming, which is wonderful. As a part of the leadership team at MView, he's responsible for the strategic direction of the company, as well as your daily role in leading the finance function. Does that sound about right, mate? Is that you in a nutshell?
Mate, that's pretty much spot on.
Okay, good stuff, mate.
Got it.
Good. I nailed it, mate. Happy days. And prior to that, mates, your previous lives worked with the iconic on a scale-up journey when it was a small sort of startup to what have now claimed the throne as Australia's largest online retailer, which is awesome. And prior to that, New Balance and starting your career with Grant Thornton, mate. So yeah, as a bright, fresh-faced undergrad, mate. So how times have changed, mate. All right, how times have changed.
Absolutely.
In your spare time, matey, I know that you're a keen cyclist, and I know that you like tinkering in your garage as well, mates. And with that mechanical mindset of yours, mate, that natural curiosity, I'm sure that's led to your success today, mate. So again, thanks for coming on.
No, thank you, Greg. I'm excited to be here.
Brilliant, mate. Well, as we mentioned, the podcast series is about past, present, and future. Really hoping to get some valuable insights that we can share with our communities alike. So a handful of questions, really interested to kind of to gauge your thoughts, but I might just kick it off with one that's nice and easy breezy, talking about sort of biggest influences. So casting your mind back, matey, growing up, what was your biggest influence, or maybe who may have been your biggest influence growing up, and why?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, I guess a lot of people probably say this, but there is truth to it. It would have to be my parents. So my folks, and especially I would say my dad. I mean, growing up, obviously great parents and still are to this day. So truly thankful for that. But I did move here when I was 2 years old from Bangladesh. And so I guess I've got a bit of the migrant story, but we don't have the sort of had to grift hard or anything like that. But, you know, my parents and my dad especially taught me the values of working hard and actually sort of maintaining the values of integrity more than anything else. So a lot of, I guess, my personal values and cultural values I've picked up from my parents, and I think it's actually led to a lot of who I am today. And that sort of leadership style that I have can be attributed to a lot of the experiences I had growing up and having them as parents.
That's really good to hear, mate. Isn't it amazing how early behaviors can shape sort of future behaviors? That's brilliant, mate. That's really, 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 really cool. Casting your mind back, still kind of dwelling on the past somewhat. If you could rewind time and speak to your 18-year-old self, without getting too introspective, of course, mate, or wanting to embarrass you, what advice would you give yourself, mate?
Oh, get onto the heats normal early on. No. Look, interestingly enough, you probably don't appreciate your parents at that age as much as you do as you tend to get a bit older. So listen to your dad. No. I think, well, yes, actually, absolutely yes. But I think one of the big ones is you're 18, you don't know everything. I've always sort of been very heavily motivated and always wanting to be correct or right. So at the age of 18, what advice would I give myself looking back? You're not always going to be right. Chill out over it. Things will work out. Just learn from the mistakes that you make, as long as they're not catastrophic. And to knock on wood, nothing has been to date. But just really chill out. You're not going to get everything right first go all the time.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, mate. Couldn't agree more. And some of the best leaders and entrepreneurs obviously have failed multiple times until they got it right. So yeah, I literally couldn't agree more. Now, getting retrospective, you've obviously achieved a great deal in your career to date. What have you learnt from your biggest failure?
Yeah, so I would say empathy, like really truly learning empathy. I've been managing teams since I've been quite young. So in my early 20s, I was put in charge of managing sort of 3 to 4 people. And at that age, you really are only really looking, well, you're only learning the world for yourself still at that point in your life. So, a lot of the failures I had in my early career were really around how I dealt with other people, how I interacted with other people, and how I guess I valued people as well. Being in sort of a bubble from a young age, so school, then university, then working in an accounting firm where everyone was sort of from a similar background, similar, I guess, drive, motivation, but also you're working on the same thing all the time. You don't really get exposed to what the wider world looks like and, what people's motivations and drivers really are. So, my biggest failures around that time was just assuming that everyone else was the same as me and wanted what I wanted. So when my teams weren't performing, looking back on it, it was not necessarily entirely the fault of, or it can't be put down to other people. It was a lot of it came down to, or comes back to me not understanding what motivated someone. Just because I wanted to work till 1 a.m. every night doesn't mean everyone else did. And that's one extreme example, obviously, but they're sort of the little things that you pick up over time.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, burning that midnight oil. I mean, it might be right for some when the time is right, but if it becomes habitual, obviously it's not going to be conducive to building a good work culture. So I couldn't agree more, mate. Thanks for that, mate.
No, absolutely. I mean, there are obviously so many other examples I could go into, but yeah, it's just, I think having empathy it's a very underestimated value, especially these days where socialization is not as prevalent.
Yeah, it's so true. I have to completely agree. And you never really know exactly what everyone's circumstances are like behind closed doors. And as a business leader, and obviously as a thought leader like yourself, you need to be kind of understanding and patient, and like you said, empathetic to people's circumstances because they will vary, and be able to play your card accordingly to kind of support that individual, whatever he or she may be going through. Yeah, it's a true skill to listen out for that.
I could not agree more.
Brilliant, mate. Thanks for that, mate. Right, fast forwarding to current day. If you were to give someone some advice who was looking to break into that senior leadership space, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges that people are going to face currently is really getting out amongst the organization or amongst their organization. So to be a successful finance leader, especially, you have to understand what's happening in all parts of the business. You've got to have a deep technical knowledge of finance and, all of the sort of technical areas that come with being a finance professional, from accounting to tax, treasury, M&A, et cetera. But you also have to understand what actually goes on in the depths of each area of the business. You don't necessarily have to be the best at it. And in fact, you never will be. You need to understand what is happening. So being able to get out and across all different teams, understand what their drivers, motivators, challenges are within the teams, and then applying the financial skills to that. So one of the better pieces of advice I've received throughout my career is the numbers always back the story, not the other way around. The story should never be the backing for the numbers. And so I guess in a pre-pandemic world, that was quite easy to do. You could just sit down with anyone, you could interact, you could have a chat, you could really just understand what people were doing day to day. So right now, I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give to someone is find how you can actually be more involved and be present within a business, because even within teams, you can probably notice that there's less interaction happening, let alone across teams, across functional.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's really hard, again, even from a cultural perspective, to be present and be visible nowadays when you've got a remote workforce. But it seems to be, well, now a bit more prevalent in our industries. But yes, building that visibility can be quite difficult. Do you have any, potentially, if we were to unpack it, any sort of hints or tips as to how someone could potentially be more visible in an organization?
Yeah, I mean, it really is a difficult one. I would say remote working is great, and I think having the flexibility to be either here or somewhere else really does help if you can plan your days around it. But being able to return to either an office form or something where you are interacting with your colleagues from a professional perspective, from a personal perspective, from being able to further your career, but also from a mental health point of view. I think just savor those moments where you're actually spending time, on a deeper level with your colleagues or your teammates or whoever it is, because there's so much that you gain from just a human interaction. And I think it's really, really underrated how much you get from physically being in the presence of someone else.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think being more involved, obviously, will make an impact. Building those constructive relationships with the right people, not necessarily your key stakeholders, but potentially anyone in that particular peer group, to better understand how different parts of the business work. I think you made a really good point. Just be more involved where you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can look back on, I guess, parts of my career where, especially if I think of an organization like The Iconic, when I was there, I would spend at least one day a fortnight working from the warehouse or the fulfillment center, as it's known. And it wasn't necessarily packing boxes, because I would be skewing the metrics like nothing else. I was so slow, even when they gave me a bit of a trial run as a joke. But just being there, and you sort of understand, the world that different people work at. I remember, there was a guy that was working there, and his whole role was how to optimize the warehouse. And he was making fake shelves out of boxes and getting people that were working on the warehouse floor to come and stand next to these hypothetical shelves. And he was saying, look, see, you can't buy the shelf with this height, because the average worker is 1.6 meters tall, and they can't reach up here, and they can't reach up there. They're not going to be able to pick at this rate and this and that. And, it's just those little snippets of conversation that I wasn't even meant to be a part of, but I overheard. And it helped me then do my job, understanding how the different elements of operations came together, and being able to forecast for that, being able to, have projections behind some of those things that actually factor in some of the human elements, such as how tall is the average person. And when you are working from home, it's those sorts of, I would say, even a water cooler conversation that you miss that you can be missing out on that can actually lead to these little light bulb moments.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And you are right, it's those little snippets of information that can help maybe build better decisions later on, because you understand the fundamentals behind the organization rather than just your scope of work. Yeah, brilliant, mate. Thank you for that. I really, really appreciate it. All right, taking my crystal ball, looking into the future, what does the future look like for MView if we're looking at next year, 2022 and beyond?
Yeah. So, I mean, we have just recently closed a round of private funding. So that's really, is really instrumental to our current growth phase and our current growth journey. And that really will sort of set us up for what we want to achieve in 2022 and beyond. So, apart from potentially further future funding rounds, as we move on with an organization where we are traditionally or have been a sort of live streaming video evidence management company. So essentially what MView does is it captures the video from either a policeman or a paramedic or some other sort of, say, emergency services worker. It securely encrypts or manages that content. And that's, I guess, paramount to why we are within that sort of real frontline worker industry, because they need that inherent security in all of their data. And then we use that encryption or security to either stream it or to store it. And then because there's a full chain of custody from end to end, it can be admissible as evidence in court or for whatever other reason an agency might need that information or data for. So that's where we were and currently are. The future of where MView is actually building a full IoT-based platform that allows for any data point between different emergency services agencies, law enforcement agencies, to actually interact using video as well as the core of the platform, and then allowing that to actually better serve the needs of, I guess, the public. So one example of a product that we've got at the moment, and it's due for release very shortly, is a weapon sensor. So essentially, as a cop pulls out their gun, it automatically triggers a camera. It triggers the recording of any camera within our network or the MView network, in 10-meter radius, a car, a police car as well, sends an alert back to base that these cameras are switched on. This was the reason for the trigger event. And this is what's happening right now. So, there are 10 officers on scene, or there are 3 paramedics or 2 fire trucks or whatever that may be. So it's building out a whole interconnected IoT device platform, and really scaling up the business and getting us ready to have that software that allows for that to happen, which is unsurprisingly very difficult to do.
It definitely sounds like it. That is very, very exciting, mate. Very, very exciting. So the future is definitely bright, mate. That's wonderful. If we were to look at, I suppose, I mean, I know a big part of your role as to why you've been so successful, and I don't just mean with MView, but with days gone by, is your ability to look at individual issues and be able to sort of problem solve. But if you're looking at what MView is currently doing, what problems is the business currently solving outside of, let's say, the prospects that lie ahead at this point?
Yeah. So, I mean, for us right now, we are a small company that's going on a bit of a growth journey. So a lot of the issues that we are facing are around scaling for growth. So, being able to have trackable metrics and data that actually allows for the internal business operations to run smoothly. As you can imagine, there are, at any given time, there could be no points of data for areas you need most, or there could be several hundred points of data for all these other areas that you don't quite know what to do with it. So as we're getting more sophisticated, and the rest of the business outside of, I guess, senior management and those who have come from a more analytical background come along that journey with us, it's actually implementing the right metrics and the ability to track those in a, I guess, efficient way, especially given that we are a tech company. You kind of want to make sure that people aren't manually running a lot of processes. The biggest, one of the issues we face is essentially just growing up and maturing and making sure that we're capturing the right metrics across all areas of the business, and we're actually feeding that into the decision-making process. We've sort of gone past that point of sort of that finger in the air test for where things should be prioritized or what the business should be doing, and actually now using concrete data to drive decision making. And that's even for a small business, it's quite a difficult journey to go on.
Yeah, and it's quite compelling once you have the real raw data. You can obviously work out exactly where your time needs to be best spent, especially if you're looking to bring on new resources or invest funds in certain projects. At least you know exactly what's going to be a priority.
Absolutely. And I think it's also the change management behind that is quite important as well, because if you have people that are used to working without data, it's being able to convince them that the data is actually not, it's a strenuous process potentially to implement it, but it really shouldn't be telling us too different to what we already know. It should actually allow us to optimize some of the decision making. So I think people sometimes, especially if they're not used to working with a lot of metrics and data, can be a bit daunted by the fact that it's either an additional process that will be implemented or it might bring something to light, but it's really managing that journey. I think it's probably as you would no doubt know, bringing people along for the journey is actually sometimes harder than the actual process or the journey itself.
Yeah, it's difficult, and it can be quite a convoluted journey, especially where you're hiring people based on skill and aptitude, but obviously it always comes down to purpose and making sure people understand what that journey looks like, what that vision looks like, how it feeds into their individual values, and then keeping them on board and keeping them engaged. It's easier said than executed, should we say?
Yes.
No, that's great, mate. Thank you so much, mate. Honestly, I feel like I'm getting a very, very good grasp on I suppose the current proposition of what the future looks like, man. The future looks remarkably bright, mate. So thank you so much. I know this is not your first rodeo, mate. You're obviously a keen public speaker, and I know that you've been on the receiving end of a handful of interesting questions, mate. I would absolutely love to know, what is the hardest interview question that you've ever been asked?
Yep. So this is actually one that was asked in a job interview, which makes it even harder to answer because you've got the pressure of getting it right. So the first question that was asked was, what is important to you? And the answer to that can, you can talk about your values, your priorities at that point in time, and I guess what you sort of want out of that job. And it's easy to construct an answer that is actually genuine or still quite genuine. But then the follow-up question to that was, what's not important to you? And you don't expect that in a job interview. And you kind of go, well, what do I say? Like, if I say something and it offends someone, that could be, the end of this process. And it actually got me thinking, okay, so if I say something and it offends someone, is it really truly not that important to me? And so then I sort of went down that line of thinking, and my answer, I can't quite remember what it was exactly, but it was sort of along the lines of, and it links back to the question you asked me earlier about what was your biggest failure. And it's down to sort of that whole empathy piece, right? Which is, I might not consider something to be hugely important. I don't know, for example, I don't consider soy milk to be important, but my partner, she drinks it all the time, right? So, if you take that as sort of an example and you go, I don't think it's important, but it could be quite important to someone else. Is it unimportant to me? Or, is it just one of those trivial things that doesn't really matter, right? So I guess my answer to that was, one, it's a really hard question to answer, so I don't know how I'm going to answer this, but two, I don't think it's right to come out and consider something unimportant without knowing all of the sort of facts around it, because something that's unimportant to you could be quite important to someone else. And, I sort of think about my journey and how that's come about. Managing people that have young children or, you know, have a young family, which I don't, you know, that family time or that personal time is very important to them, right? And for me, not having too many other distractions in my life, it may not be as important. You know, working from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m., that 1 hour time gap isn't as important to me as it is to someone who actually has a ton of things they have to do in that 1 hour time. You know, could be weeks worth of laundry, could be, you know, cooking for a young family or whatever it is. I guess the things that are important to me are hugely important to someone else. So it was an interview question, but it was also a chance to have a bit of self-reflection around, you know, what sort of the journey that I'd had. So yeah, what's not important to you? I think it's probably a good question to ask yourself or anyone around you, just to really understand what that means to you.
I think it's definitely a prickly one, isn't it? Because it's almost similar to, you know, what's your strengths and weaknesses? Well, 9 times out of 10, most people know exactly what they can excel at. But when you start to delve a little bit deeper about what am I comfortable voicing that I'm not very good at in an interview setting? I'm not very good at making coffee. I don't know. I don't know. I'm pretty awful at making a good cup of tea. I have no idea. But yeah,
absolutely.
It's a strange one.
Yeah, and especially when someone asks you to value the importance of something as well, you know, could lead to a very healthy debate, or it could lead to someone taking quite a bit of offense to something.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't want to offend anybody, do we? We're nice people. Let's not upset anybody.
Absolutely. If you asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said a non-alcoholic beer is unimportant, but here I am drinking.
There you are. I love it. It's obviously important to someone, like you said. So exactly, let's not upset the masses. Not today, anyway. That's great, mate. I absolutely love that question. And listen, on a party note, I just want to say thank you so much, mate. I've learned a lot about you in a very short space of time, mate. So I appreciate the insights and input. But just to sort of to wrap things up, a bit of a fun question, mate. To be honest, not necessarily to do with insights or past, or maybe present, and maybe future, maybe later on. But in terms of if we're in a pub, mate, and beer wasn't on your menu, first of all, be a pretty awful pub. It wasn't selling beer. A pretty shocking pub, to be honest. But what drink would I be buying you, mate, if beer wasn't one of your first choices?
Cup of Earl Grey tea and send me straight to bed. That's where we're at. Oh, what would it be? I don't know. Beer wasn't on the menu.
Yeah.
And I'm at a pub. I think you've just toppled the hardest interview question. No, I think it would have to be, you know, if it's summer, a gin and tonic. If it's winter, probably a glass of Pinot Noir.
Good choice, mate. Very, very good choice.
What about yourself?
Blimey, mate, there isn't a lot that I wouldn't drink, to be honest, especially after a tough day in the recruitment world. But if beer was on the menu, I'd have to be a bourbon, mate. Probably a decent Maker's Mark and Coke, to be honest. That definitely floats my boat. And not necessarily on a Thursday or Friday, most days of the week. But mate, listen, I just want to say thank you, Khalid. You've been unbelievably charismatic and very honest and authentic, mate. So thank you so much for your input, and thank you so much for your time.
No, thanks, Greg. It's been really enjoyable for me to be here, and it's a great Monday lunchtime beer that I'm having now as well. So thanks, Greg. It's really been my pleasure to be part of this.
No, it's brilliant, mate. We absolutely loved having you on the show, mate. And listen, mate, so I just want to say thank you for your input and your insights, and cheers to Enview and everything that lies ahead, mate.
Cheers to you, Greg. Thank you.
Cool.